Hello, thank you for joining us today and welcome to today's ESHA Research webinar. My name is Ben, joined as always by Alicia, and today we're going to look at calculating the PDCAAS for %dV in protein in the Genesis software. A little background as we always do. ESHA Research was established in 1981 as one of the very first nutrition software solutions. Today, we have a large number of software products, including the Genesis R&D Foods software, which we're going to talk primarily about today, the Genesis supplements application, the food processor, and a lot of consulting services for labeling and analysis as well. Like I said, looking at the Genesis Foods application today, which was released in 1991 and is designed for product development, formulation analysis, menu analysis, reporting, and regulatory compliance. We do have a couple webinars coming up. On September 25th, we're going to go through some top Genesis R&D user Q&A. So a lot of the questions that we've gotten in past webinars, see and go through those questions and topics and just go through a lot of very common issues and questions a lot of people have. And then on October 23rd, menu labeling, practical applications, and best practices in Genesis. So looking at the restaurant side of things for the menu label. If you'd like to register for those or view any of our past webinars, you can go onto our website to sign up for those or again, watch those past ones. Please note, as always, this webinar is being recorded. You can always watch it on our website later. All of our past webinars as well are on our website, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. We do have a number of people standing by from technical support, sales, regulatory type of people. You know, if you have any questions whatsoever, ask them along the way. Don't wait till the very end because we may get a big flood of questions in and we may not be able to get to those questions. So if you come up with a question, ask it right away and we'll answer it as fast as we can. And you know, if it's a question that's asked a few times, we may ask it out loud at the end as well. But definitely don't hold all your questions to the very end. Today, what we're going to be talking about, %dV protein on nutrition facts labels, US labeling regulations for protein and amino acids, calculating the PDCAAS value, how to display %dV on the label in Genesis, and again, some questions as we go. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alicia. She's going to get into the meat of the topic today.
Thank you, Ben. Hey, everyone. I'm actually excited for this webinar today because we receive a fair number of questions about determining and reporting %dV for protein for nutrition labeling. In fact, it's one of our top questions. And we're going to start by asking you a question. How do you currently determine PDCAAS for your labeling purposes? We're sending out a poll right now, so you should be seeing that. And just let us know from the listed options, what's your primary method for determining PDCAAS? If you don't have one, send that response back to us. And I think this is the first time we've ever sent out a poll during a webinar, so it's kind of fun. We'll give you just a few more moments for that. And just know that we greatly appreciate your participation in this and your feedback. And we will send up the follow email later today. So know that that always includes a survey with various questions, but it also gives you additional opportunity to provide us with input. And again, we always appreciate what your thoughts are on the software. Okay, thanks so much. We'll close that now. So today, we'll discuss how to display the %dV protein on a label in Genesis, as well as talk about how you might calculate PDCAAS as a means to arrive at a reportable %dV for US labeling. At this time, we have to manually calculate PDCAAS outside of Genesis, and once we have our PDCAAS, we can enter this factor into Genesis, and that will calculate the %dV for protein on the label. But for background, let's cover a little bit of the regulation. With US labeling regulations, there are instances when %dV for protein is required to be listed on the nutrition facts label. In other circumstances, you may choose to report %DV for protein voluntarily. Per the CFR, you must report %DV for protein on nutrition labels of foods intended for infants, which is age 0 to 12 months, on nutrition labels of foods intended for children, which are ages 1 to 3 years, and on nutrition labels of products that make a claim about protein. So this includes adult labels, and the ages for adult labels are 4 years and up. Now you can voluntarily declare the %DV for protein on a label without making a protein claim on the package, but you must declare %DV for protein if you include a protein claim on your product package. For U.S. adults, the dietary reference value, or the DRV, which is used to calculate the %DV for protein, is 50 grams. With most of the nutrients to determine the %DV, you take the grams or the milligrams or whatever the nutrient is reported in, and you divide that number by the recommended daily value for that nutrient. But with protein, there's a little more to it. The %DV on the U.S. Nutrition Facts label factors in the digestibility of the protein. So the %DV is not simply a calculation of the total grams of protein in the food divided by the DRV for protein. We have to use a PER or a PDCAAS in the calculation. And protein digestibility, in very, very simple terms, essentially means how well our bodies can access and use the protein in the individual amino acids provided by the foods we consume. So the nutrition label reports the total grams of protein in the food, but the %DV is a reflection of the percent contributed by the amount of digestible protein. As I mentioned, the CFR indicates that we use a PER or a PDCAAS to report the %DV for protein on the label. PER is the protein efficiency ratio, and that is a lab-determined value. It's used for infant labels, which again is 0 to 12 months of age, and a PER is a value of 0 to 2.5. PDCAAS is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. It's a lab-determined value, or we can calculate it. It's used for child labels, again, ages 1 to 3 years, and adult labels, 4 years and up. The PDCAAS is a value of 0 to 1. And see that it says right there in the name that PDCAAS factors in a correction for the digestibility of the amino acids contained in the food. The PDCAAS source listed in the CFR is the Protein Quality Evaluation Report of the Joint FAO-WHO Expert Consultation, and we provided that citation for you here with the document reference and a link. We'll share these slides following the webinar, so you'll have access to that reference. And today we're focusing on PDCAAS because the bulk of the questions we receive center around determining %DV protein for U.S. adult labels. I do want to note that there are alternative approaches to factoring protein digestibility, like the DIAAS, which is the Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score. And there are certainly other methods. But today, again, we're focusing on PDCAAS because that's in terms of complying with U.S. labeling regulations. We don't have time to cover all the aspects of protein, but I want to mention a few points to lay the foundation for calculating PDCAAS and reporting %DV for protein. First of all, why is protein important? Very simply put, it plays a role in many essential functions in our bodies. Protein is a source of energy. We need protein for tissue development and repair, for production of hormones, for enzyme function, and much, much more. Protein is a hot topic in foods on the market and in development. We see a vast array of products formulated specifically with protein in mind, and these might be marketed to help meet essential dietary needs or play a part in building muscle or bulk, for exercise and activity recovery. We see the continued growth of plant-based protein products, and protein might be a specific consideration of populations where addressing malnutrition is the primary concern. Protein comes from animal and plant sources. Generally speaking, we have a common understanding that animal sources provide relatively accessible proteins. Casein is often referred to as a gauge in terms of complete protein and digestibility. And for plant-based proteins, we may be familiar with consuming a combination of complementary foods to eat a complete protein. You know, like beans and rice is nice, and other combinations. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and to completely oversimplify, when we consume foods, our bodies break down the proteins into their amino acids and then reassemble or take from the digestible parts the components we need to create, maintain, and support our bodies and run our systems. Our bodies may not be able to access or use all of the parts, so parts that are not digestible or parts that end up as byproducts of our system's processes may travel on through as waste. There are hundreds of amino acids that have been identified, and we primarily hear about 20 amino acids. Our bodies can make or synthesize some of the amino acids. These are referred to as non-essential or dispensable amino acids. Amino acids that our bodies can't make must be obtained from outside sources like eating food. Amino acids that we can't make are referred to as essential or indispensable amino acids. And today we focus on 9 essential amino acids when we're talking about PDCAAS and protein sources. And you can see them listed here, and we'll see them again on the protein quality report in Genesis. Note here that cysteine and tyrosine also get honorable mention as they are considered necessary in some conditions and for some age groups. A complete protein contains all 9 essential amino acids in the correct proportions that our bodies need. An incomplete protein doesn't have enough of one or more of the essential amino acids. So again, manufacturers tend to formulate products with complementary ingredients to provide complete proteins. You can, however, have a food that contains complete protein where all the amino acids meet or exceed their respective ratios. But if the digestibility is lacking, if our bodies can't access the protein in those foods, that food can have a PDCAAS of less than 1. We see protein digestibility expressed as a percent or as a value, like 79% or 0.79 factor in a lot of research articles and information. A plain ingredient has 1 protein digestibility factor, but when we're working with combination foods, we need to account for the various digestibility factors of the individual ingredients that those foods contain. Let me emphasize here that if your finished product has only 1 source of protein, like milk or chicken or whole wheat flour, or your product contains a few or multiple ingredients, but they have the same source of protein, like pea protein, then you can go directly to Genesis, enter your PDCAAS, if you have that, and the software will readily calculate your percent DV for protein for you. And you can celebrate your small victory and go on with your labeling. However, for combination foods where the protein comes from several different ingredients of different protein sources, you must either obtain the PDCAAS for your finished product from a lab analysis, or you can calculate the PDCAAS using protein digestibility factors of the individual ingredients and the amino acid score for your recipe. So now we're getting to the nitty-gritty part, calculating PDCAAS. And honestly, it can be kind of fun once you get the pieces of the puzzle together. To do this, we're going to refer to a few reports in Genesis that will provide some of the information that we need. But again, remember, at this time, the PDCAAS calculation has to be performed outside of Genesis. These are the calculations you use for determining PDCAAS for mixed foods. PDCAAS equals amino acid score times the protein digestibility. And again, in this case, because we're talking about combination foods, it means amino acid score times your recipe protein digestibility. And for the recipe protein digestibility, you take the percent that each ingredient contributes to the total protein in your recipe and multiply that by the respective ingredient's protein digestibility factor. This gives you a weighted protein digestibility, factoring in the ingredients that contribute the most to the least protein and the overall digestibility. So the information you need to gather to calculate PDCAAS is amino acid data for your ingredients, percent protein that each ingredient contributes to the total protein, protein digestibility factors for each ingredient that contributes to the total protein, your amino acid score from the protein quality report, and your recipe protein digestibility, so using that equation that I just showed you. To gather this information, let's look at the following. In Genesis, when we're calculating PDCAAS, you need amino acid data for the ingredients that contribute to the total protein of the recipe. You may need to request the amino acid data from your suppliers or refer to reliable sources for amino acid data. For instance, most of the ingredients in the ESHA database that reference the USDA SR source report amino acid data. In general, you don't need amino acid data for ingredients that contain 0 grams of protein. And once you've entered amino acid data for your ingredients or chosen ingredients that report amino acid data, open your recipe and view the spreadsheet report with protein and the amino acids displayed. You can select the nutrients to view set called basic protein and amino acids, or you could create a customized set that includes protein, amino acids, and then any other nutrients you wanted to include. Just like with any spreadsheet, if you see dashes in the amino acids, especially the essential amino acids for an ingredient that contributes to the total protein, this indicates missing data and you want to fill that in. For calculating the recipe protein digestibility, we need to determine which ingredients contribute to the total protein and in what percent. In Genesis, view the single nutrient report for your recipe set to protein to determine the percent that each ingredient contributes to the total protein. And again, some ingredients may contribute no protein. Also, for calculating the recipe protein digestibility, you'll need to know the protein digestibility factor for each ingredient that contributes to the total protein. Some suppliers might provide protein digestibility information, maybe especially products that are developed and marketed as protein sources, like single ingredient proteins, concentrates, and isolates. If you don't have supplier provided information, then your organization will want to establish a protocol on how to collect the information that you need. You can certainly, again, push back to your suppliers to see if they can provide that. But protein digestibility factors are available from a variety of other sources. The report of the joint FAO and WHO that I mentioned as part of the source for calculating PDCAAS does include a list of protein digestibility factors. You might have a specific reference, like a research article that reports the protein digestibility for you. ESHA also maintains a list of protein digestibility factors and PDCAAS values from a number of research articles and sources, including that FAO WHO list and additional. And this is available on the ESHA website. We've provided a link here. Just know that this is a live list, so we do continue adding ingredients when we find them. So if you use this list, you might want to check back periodically to see if it's been updated with additional ingredients. And just know that depending on the research cited, we may see different factors reported for the same type of food. So refer to the form of the ingredient that you're using in your formula, like a dry form or a cooked form. And if you see differing protein digestibility references, use the factor that best supports your ingredients. So you've entered the amino acid data for your ingredients and you've identified which ingredients contribute the most protein. Now view the protein quality report for your recipe. This gives you the amino acid score, which is the starting reference before we adjust or correct the score based on the protein digestibility. On the protein quality report, the amino acid showing the lowest percent is the limiting amino acid, and that provides you with the amino acid score for your recipe. If all amino acids show 100% or more, this indicates a complete protein. If one or more of the amino acids show less than 100%, then this indicates an incomplete protein. And you'll notice here that methionine and cysteine, as well as phenylalanine and tyrosine, are listed. Cysteine can replace a portion of methionine, and tyrosine can replace a portion of phenylalanine, so they receive consideration in terms of the essential or indispensable amino acids. And also with this report, we get a fair number of questions on the ratios that are shown. So you can see here the actual ratio and the ideal ratio. The actual ratio is the ratio of each amino acid in your recipe based on the amino acid data reported for your ingredients. And I stress here that if you are missing amino acid data for the ingredients that contribute to protein, this information will not be accurate. So keep that in mind. And the ideal ratio is based on the 1985 FAO WHO UNU suggested pattern of amino acid requirements for a 2 to 5-year-old child. This is reported specifically for US labeling, and the specific age profile has been confirmed by the FDA as the pattern to use for this purpose. And those ratios are presented in milligrams of amino acid per gram of protein per serving. Remember that part of the equation of calculating PDCAAS is determining the protein digestibility for your recipe. So I'm showing you the recipe protein digestibility formula again. And using the percent of protein and the protein digestibility of each ingredient, we can determine the recipe protein digestibility. Also remember that this results in a weighted protein digestibility that takes into account the digestibility factors for the ingredients based on their percent contribution to the total protein. We identify the percent that each ingredient contributes to protein from the single nutrient report in Genesis, and we multiply that percent by the ingredient's digestibility factor that we've obtained from a reliable source, like the FAO WHO list or one of those references from the ESHA maintained list. We add each of the products together to come up with the recipe protein digestibility. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Let's start connecting these dots and we'll calculate PDCAAS. Here is my example recipe. It's an apple cinnamon protein bar that contains a variety of ingredients contributing to protein. I need to gather the information I need to calculate PDCAAS. So I review the spreadsheet report showing protein and amino acids. I want to be sure that I don't have any dashes for the essential amino acids. The nutrients to view set for protein and amino acids shows the essential and the non-essential, because when your supplier or source reports amino acid information, we often see more than just the essentials, and it's helpful to have that full picture, but just know that you have more amino acids here than on the protein quality report. Now note that I do see dashes here for a few of my ingredients, but if I take a look at the protein values, they're 0. So I have these dashes here, but I have no protein contributed from this ingredient and none from this ingredient. So I feel that the data I have presented will support my PDCAAS calculation. Best practice, of course, would be to fill in those zeros, but for this purpose, we'll move on. Next, I look at the single nutrient report set to protein, and notice how the ingredients are listed in descending order by percent and that they contribute to the total protein. The values are listed per serving here, and we have a total of 9.54 grams of protein per serving for this product. We can also see that several ingredients contribute 0 protein per serving, and this may be due to the fact that the ingredients don't contain any protein, or they might be occurring in such minimal amounts in the recipe that it doesn't work out per serving that they contribute any protein. From the reliable sources list, I find the protein digestibility factor of each ingredient that contributes to the total protein in the product. Note here, the protein digestibility factor for the rolled oats is 0.91. You might also notice that there are several different oat ingredients on the list. So several different forms of oats, and I want to pick the one that matches my ingredient best. Here, fortunately, we have rolled oats, so I can match that exactly. And here I've collected my information in one place, and I made note of the percent protein from the single nutrient report and the protein digestibility from my reliable source for each of the ingredients contributing to protein in my recipe. And now comes the fun part. We get to fill in the puzzle pieces and calculate for PDCAAS. With my example recipe, I can calculate the recipe protein digestibility. So you can see here for each ingredient, the percent protein multiplied by the digestibility factor. So the protein for the soy protein isolate, percent per my serving, multiplied by its digestibility factor, gives me a digestibility for that ingredient. For the oats, I have the percent that it contributed to the protein total. Multiply that by the rolled oats digestibility factor, gives me the ingredient digestibility for that, and so on. So I get those totals, I add these together, and I come up with my recipe protein digestibility. So that's one of the numbers I need for calculating PDCAAS. And here, with recipe protein digestibility, it is possible to have a value that is greater than 1. Now I take a look at the protein quality report to get the amino acid score. And again, just like my previous example, we see that the lysine contributes the lowest percent at 93%. So the amino acid score for my recipe is 0.93. And finally, we've arrived at our PDCAAS. So I multiply the amino acid score of 0.93 by the recipe protein digestibility of 0.9588 to get a PDCAAS of 0.8917. And I would enter this value in Genesis. And note here that if your PDCAAS calculates to greater than 1, that's where you would just enter it as 1. And that is specifically detailed out in the CFR. So through all of this, this is the easiest part, displaying percent DV on the nutrition facts label in Genesis. So once you've determined your PDCAAS, it's completely easy to show it and to enter it and show percent DV in Genesis. First, you open the recipe, choose view label. I like to choose view label so I can see what's happening as I work. Choose the edit label button, nutrient options, expand the nutrient options for protein. And here you can see the line for protein quality score, PDCAA. The right-hand column is a text field, and so you can type in your value. Just know it does round it to 2 decimals, so if I type in my 0.8917, Genesis is going to round that and report it as 0.89. And then, of course, you want to remember to click the box next to show percent DV for protein. And just as easily, you can view the label and see that percent DV is displayed. The percent DV calculates here using an unrounded value for protein. So remember that my example recipe had 9.54 grams of protein per serving. 9.54 times the PDCAAS of 0.89 gives me 8.49, and divide that by 50, the DRV for protein, gives us a 17% DV for protein on this label. So the grams of protein rounds up from 9.54 to 10 grams per serving, but the percent DV factoring in the PDCAAS reports a 17%, which is appropriate because I know my product has a little less than complete protein, and that's reflected on this label. So now I'm going to jump into Genesis and just again show you where to find these features and the reports that I talked about. So starting from the opening screen in Genesis, I would just open a recipe. And I'm going to use my PDCAAS example. So this may look familiar based on the slides that we just saw. So one of the first things I'll do, as always with any recipe after you've completed entering it, is view the spreadsheet report. Here I have my nutrients set to my mandatory 2016 US label nutrients, which is, again, we always say this, it's best practice. You review your spreadsheet report and make sure all of the values are filled in so that you know your label will be accurate. Here for PDCAAS, I just want to double check my protein and amino acids. So to go to nutrients to view, click on the Home tab, Nutrients to View. In the Nutrients to View settings or menu, you see all of the preloaded sets of nutrients that come with Genesis, and any that you've added will be appearing up at the top of the list. Here I'm going to select basic protein and amino acids, and this shows me, just like the slide example showed, my recipe showing a few weight and calories, and then my protein totals, as well as the individual amino acids. And again, want to make sure that I don't have any dashes in amino acids or in ingredients that are contributing to the protein. Like I said before, these dashes are appearing with new ingredients that report 0. So at this point, I'll just move forward. Then we take a look at the single nutrient report. When you open the single nutrient report, it may or may not be set to protein. It's likely going to be set to calories by default. But any of the nutrients that appear in your Nutrients to View set can be selected. And then choosing that nutrient will rank your ingredients by the order in which they contribute to that selected nutrient. So here I've got them in order contributing to total protein. And you can see, again, these values may look familiar. The soy protein isolate contributes the most, the rolled oats next, and so on. But this gives me my percents for each ingredient. And then we have the protein quality report. I may have double clicked it, so I might be trying to open twice. There we go. Yep, sorry. So again, protein quality report is identifying which of the amino acids is occurring in the lowest amount. It may be that if you have complete proteins and all your amino acids are present, this may be, all of them may be over 100%. You would still have one that is the lowest, so you choose the lowest amino acid. If you had two that were reporting the same percent, that qualifies. So pick whichever is the lowest percent that you see on this report. And then we'll take a look at the label. So recipe, view label. I think I've made my Genesis tired by working through all of these PDCAAS calculations, but it's coming along. So here you see US label, standard label. We've got our protein reported as 10 grams, and there's no %dB reported because we haven't selected that yet. So go into the edit label settings, nutrient options, find protein and expand the options for that. And here you will see, again, protein quality score over on the right hand is a text field. And here you just type in your PDCAAS. If you were working with PER, working with infant labels, you would enter PER, but here we have our PDCAAS. And then again, remember to click the show %dB on the label. And there you have %dB reported, again, adjusted for that PDCAAS and reporting in the correct amounts. I'll try one other thing to show you here. And the claims, just so you know that the claims section of Genesis, you've entered the PDCAAS, and so note that it is basing the claim qualification on that adjusted percent based on the PDCAAS that we just entered. So that's what I have to show you in Genesis. I'm going to hand it back over to Ben, and we'll go into some Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia. That was some amazing information and just a lot of information as well. I kind of always frame it like this because I always feel this way after a lot of Alicia's overviews of some of these topics. But if you feel like me and you feel like you need some additional training, we do have a few coming up. Our next one's actually just next week. So if you want to take a trip out into the Oak Brook, Chicago area, we're gonna have a Genesis training August 20th through 22nd. It's going to be the professional and or advanced training that we've changed most of our trainings to. So if you're going to do the first 2 days, our kind of standard professional training, just the third day is the advanced section, or join us for all three and get all of those days of training. We have a few more coming up as well, October 8th through 10th, again in Oak Brook, which is our training facility, that professional and or advanced training option, November 5th through 7th as well. And then we have a professional menu label training coming up, some more of a restaurant focused training coming up in December, and that's going to be in Miami, Florida. So that's going to be December 4th and 5th. Before we get into some of the questions here, if we didn't get your question, or if there's something that maybe you want to maybe a more detailed answer for, something like that, you can always reach out to us, reach out to our sales team, support team, consulting team, nutrition team, depending on what sort of question it is. We'll always get back to you or send it to the appropriate person. And of course, a lot of information on our website, our LinkedIn page, our blog, our e-newsletter, our e-learning center, all of that information on our website that's got all of the past webinars, blogs, all that sort of stuff. So a lot of information on the website as well. We're going to get into a few questions now. The first one is, what version of Genesis are we using, and what version of Genesis do we have these features in place? Currently, we're using Genesis version 11.7. So that's the newest version of the software. Everything that you saw is going to be done through that. Realistically, all of the things that we've seen for these specific things for PDCAAS and protein have been around for at least since version 11.2, which was when the new labeling laws came out. So, and before that, the new labeling regulations weren't in the software. But if you are on the cloud version of Genesis, you're using the newest version no matter what. And if you have any questions about getting into the cloud, so you don't have to worry about manually running those updates, give our sales team a call and we can talk you through that. Our next question, let me get back over to it. If your amino acid score is greater than 1, do I use that number in the calculation, or should the amino acid score be rounded down to 1 or truncated down to 1 before multiplying by the protein digestibility?
Good question. Yes, and your amino acid score can be greater than 1. So that's where, if we're saying all of those occur at greater than 100%, you can still use the lowest score. So it could be over 100%. And again, that's going to come back around. So you're using your protein digestibility for your recipe, and that's going to sway your PDCAAS. So your amino acid score is reflecting a complete protein if all are being reported over 1. So go ahead and use that value as is. Your protein digestibility recipe, protein digestibility calculation, the value from that as is, multiply those. And then if that's greater than 1, you would just enter it at 1.
Great. Another question that we got, kind of piggybacking on the idea of, do we record these? Will the PowerPoints be available as well? And that's yes. So when we email out our follow-up after the webinar, for either the people that watched it live or weren't able to attend, we'll attach that PowerPoint in. And then if you go back onto the website to watch it later, that PowerPoint will be available to be downloaded right where you watch it as well. So that PowerPoint will be available in a couple of different locations, depending on how you watch it and where you go to get it. All right, our next question. What if I have some ingredients that contribute minimally to protein, but I can't get a protein digestibility factor for those ingredients?
Sure. So you want to perform due diligence in trying to obtain all of the information that you need. And then you want to establish a protocol within your organization on how to handle this. So I'm not going to advise you one way or another, but it is certainly something you need to talk about in your organization. You can research protein digestibility for the specific ingredient that you need through research articles. If you just research protein digestibility and the ingredient name, you may find some good resources, and you're looking for true protein digestibility for those. And then you might consider, is PDCAAS analysis feasible for you? So sending out actual product to a lab. Typical lab testing would involve actual feeding of samples of the product and testing on digestibility on actual samples. So something to certainly have a conversation about within your organization.
Perfect. Next question, what if I have PDCAAS values instead of protein digestibility factors for all of my ingredients? Can I just average those to calculate the PDCAAS for my recipe?
Great question, and it's not the same. So when you're working with a mixed food, using PDCAAS values rather than protein digestibility factors for the individual ingredients, it doesn't give you the same results. I've actually tried it just to see how the numbers work out, and it doesn't work the same. And then that doesn't follow the method referenced in the CFR. So you do want to be using methods that have been stated and are suggested for us to use. So again, your numbers might be close, but it's not quite right. So you want to find or follow the proper steps there. And remember that it's not just an average. So if you have PDCAAS for several ingredients and you just did a flat out average of those, it wouldn't be the same. So when you're calculating PDCAAS, you have to consider the amount each ingredient contributes to the protein and then use the protein digestibility factors to come up with your value.
Perfect. Our next question, how do I find ingredients that report amino acid values?
Sure, I'll show you a couple, or I'll mention a couple different ways. One would be regarding supplier data sheets. You might see amino acid detail on ingredients that are known to be a good source of protein, or those marketed specifically as protein sources. So those we tend to see more amino acid data readily available and reported on supplier spec sheets or data sheets. Otherwise, you might have to, again, push back to the supplier and specifically request amino acid data. And then in Genesis, let me just show you a way to search by nutrient. We have, we call it the F5 search or the nutrient search. Let me just close down my recipe. And then I'll show you how to use the F5 or the nutrient search. So open ingredient to access a search field. From here, you can press your F5 or your function 5 key, and you'll see the nutrient search screen here. So this is, again, how we are searching the database by specific nutrient content or specific nutrients. So here I want to choose the select button. I see my list of available nutrients, and I'll choose I'm going to find my amino acids. So what I'm wanting to do is show me the foods in the database that report amino acids. I'm going to take a couple of these. I can search for up to 3 nutrients at any given time. So I'm just going to choose histidine, lysine, and tryptophan. Select OK, and then by setting the parameters here, show me if a value is greater than or equal to 0. So it's not, this particular search, I'm not saying show me anything higher than, I'm just saying show me any value that's reported. So greater than or equal to 0 for all 3 of these, and it will show me which foods are reporting values for these amino acids. I'm going to leave my limit set at 1,000. I typically don't, but for this purpose, I know there are quite a few foods in there reporting amino acids, so I'll just let that limit remain. And then for, again, F5, nutrient search, our results look something like this. So it's showing us the value could be 0 or it could be greater than 0 because that's how I set the parameter. but showing me my 3 amino acids, and all of these foods report those. It might be safe to assume that if it's reporting these 3, then it might be reporting all of the essential amino acids that I'm looking for. Maybe, maybe not. You know, there certainly might be some that don't report. If you click on any of these columns, it will sort the results in order. So first I clicked on ascending order and then descending order so I can see those that are contributing the most in tryptophan. So that's one way to search through the Genesis database or your Genesis database for any ingredients that you've added as well and find matching results to what you're looking for.
All right, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. The first one, how should you enter amino acid data if the supplier information gives you a combined value for, and I'm not going to embarrass myself and try to actually say the names of the amino acids, but basically the amino acid and the other one that can be used for some, you mentioned those before, Alicia, if they give you a combined value for those instead of separated values. And we actually got an answer from our consulting team on that. And really, if you're getting a combined value for 2 separate nutrients, the number 1 thing to do is push back to your supplier, request separated values. You know, if they don't have a way to do that, you could take it from there, but definitely the very first step you'd want to take would be request separate values for each of those nutrients. And then our very last question we've got today, does the FDA allow food companies to add amino acids to food products in order to make the food product contain complete protein? For example, if a product doesn't qualify for complete protein because it's short on lysine or tryptophan, can you add lysine or tryptophan to achieve complete protein for that product?
And that is a great question. So it's come up, and of course, manufacturers are combining or using individual amino acids to kind of pump up or round out, complete the proteins. So it's in practice, but we've had a few questions from different aspects of that. So we did reach out to the FDA regarding the practice of adding individual amino acids to food products. If you're familiar at all with supplement labels, you might know that if you market an isolated or an individual amino acid, you are not to report that amino acid value as protein. So an individual amino acid doesn't make a protein by the labeling standards. So I hope you're following that. So that's where if you just combined a bunch of individual occurring amino acids not coming from foods necessarily, there might be special consideration or things that you do want to think about. So the FDA responded that they acknowledge there's a need to review industry practice building complete proteins from the addition of free amino acids. And at this time, while the labeling regulations don't prohibit a firm from adding free amino acids to a conventional food to create a complete protein, if manufacturers are combining amino acids and protein sources in an effort to meet a protein target, they must ensure that any claims included on packages are not false or misleading. So proceed with caution and do your homework that all claims that you're making are supported. And the FDA also mentioned that they need to revisit determination of protein content once validated analytical methods or regulatory definition for protein is established. So, you know, we could be seeing more solid definitions and more guidance from FDA on that.
Perfect. And that was the last question we were going to get to today. If we didn't get to any of your questions, certainly follow up with our support or nutrition or consulting teams or sales team, depending on what sort of question it was. And we'll get back to you on a one-on-one basis, especially if it was kind of a more specific individual question about, you know, maybe your individual ingredients, things like that. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and have a great day.